After e4, e5, f4, d5, we go on with this. And now we're going to look at all the moves that we haven't seen yet. Let's have a quick mention of this move, d4. This is one of the most popular moves as well. Let's see how to exploit it at best. Now we have to take the pawn in d. This is important because now we want a pawn. Even though this is a popular idea, it's not good. So for example, like here there's two moves that make sense. e5, pushing the pawn forward, or queen take, recapturing the pawn. Either way, that doesn't work. So e5, push the pawn forward and preserves the right to take back. Doesn't really work because bishop c5 keeps control of the pawn, so we're up a pawn. Knight f3 attacking that pawn, knight c6. Okay, and now that pawn is still ours. We're just up in material, a central pawn for no reason. Bishop to b5, pinning the knight so that the knight can take in d4. Knight to e7. And that means when we get taken, we take back, and the knight is still defending. It looks like though this knight in c6 is pinned, so knight to d4 appears to be possible, but it's actually not. Let's make an example. If the knight actually does take in d4, you can say, okay, you can't really take that knight. I mean, you can take it with the bishop, but you don't want to give the bishop pair. For nothing, the queen will take back, and it looks really good for white. It is really good for white. The next move now is shocking. Knight to f5. Completely crazy. The idea here is very simple. Now our opponent has double attack on this knight, and we had a double defense rate, and now we are literally removing one of the defenders of that knight. This is crazy. But let's see what happens now. If our opponent, well, let's say there's an option now of taking this knight in f5 or the knight in c6. I would totally recommend white now to take this knight with the bishop, and then pawn takes back and carry on with the game, giving us the bishop pair at least. But the thing is that if white takes the knight in c6, for instance, queen h4 check. There's nowhere to go here that makes sense because you're about to checkmate the opponent. And if the king goes to d2, you know, you're beginning to have fun here. This game is not going to last. So obviously the white player will have to push the pawn to stop the check. But now knight takes in g3. And taking back now allows us to take this rook with check. King moves, but then we're skewering the opponent queen with the bishop. We're going to skewer the king and win the queen. So we're winning the opponent queen. If our opponent... Oh, by the way, there is no move here. If, for example, the knight moves, there's a discovered check. But it's a discovered check that does nothing. You play c6 and you're attacking the bishop. Now you might argue that our opponent can play knight to f3, attacking this queen. It looks like one of the thematic moves available. Simply queen to h5. And there's an attack remaining on this bishop and an attack on this rook. So it looks like the only way to preserve material for white is to go to f1 with the rook and say, you know, take me with the knight, and then at least I'll save my bishop when I take you back. But, you know, it's a much better endgame because look at the material, right? We both got the bishop pair. Our opponent's got two knights and a rook. We have two rooks. So it looks like this is actually fine for our opponent, but now we play f6. And after castling and placing the rook on the open file on the king, this king, what you need to understand, is very unsafe, and the opponent can't castle because, look, all of the four pieces on this side of the king are still in the back rank, so that's not going to happen. If our opponent takes us, crazy enough, for example, the best move is castle. So we're doing it for the attack development. Position evaluated minus 460, minus 5, more or less at this point. This takes us back to a recap, and what we're going to do is, okay, we're going to d4 and take e5, okay. Defend that pawn. Knight f3, keep defending the pawn. Bishop b5, knight e7, and after the knight takes, we set knight to f5, and that's it. What if our opponent instead, oh well, why can't just castle now because we got so many attackers over this knight. What if white takes our knight instead of taking the knight in c6, takes the one in f5? Okay, take back the bishop. And the funny thing is our opponent can't castle. That's the main problem that he has. But still, at least in this case, the white player might try to keep playing this game, although the position is already better for black. Knight to c3, developing castle. Going on for development. We don't care that there's two pieces attacking this pawn. Looks like this could be free for white. So let's make an example. If white takes it with a queen, queen h4 check. And again, moving the king is crazy because you've got the cooperation with this bishop. The dark square bishop is very strong. If g3, queen e7, protecting our dark square bishop and allowing the arrival of the rooks. So for instance here, knight to e4 with the idea of winning the bishop pair from us. There's double attack on this bishop, and if we take this, then white can take back. This is met with bishop to b4 check, and it's too late now. Even if you blockade the pawn, creating a counter-attack, you'll play rook f to d8, and that's it. We're winning the opponent knight for free. If queen moves to c4, it seems like it's still defending this one, whilst there's still an attack on this bishop. However, rook to d4 completes the masterpiece. This pawn is pinned, and we're going to win material. And in this position, earlier we went through queen taking in d5. What if our opponent wins the free pawn with the knight? Okay, nothing much, not much difference here. You win the pawn back in c2 with the bishop. And crazy enough, we are giving away the bishop pair, but the reason is we're doing much better. This knight now will have to move, but I mean, no, of course not. The knight will not move because then you win the queen. So the queen will have to take the bishop, and then we can take the knight, and we've got much better position here. Look at how unsafe the opponent king looks like, and how smooth the development of our rooks will be. There is no Zwischenzug for this knight, so that's not going to be possible. So it seems like the only move that makes sense here is to take the bishop. But, you know, after that, and this position evaluated as if black was almost up a piece. You're threatening knight to d4, the rooks are coming, and this king is in huge trouble. He will never castle for the rest of the game. So you may argue in this position, what if, instead of taking the bishop, the white player says, you know what, I'll destroy your king side at least. Knight to f6, okay, well, take with the queen. And now, if you get taken back, obviously you're going to take the opponent queen. But the thing is that the way our pieces are placed gives us a much completely winning endgame. The rooks are coming to the open files, and we're winning this endgame. Position evaluated -3. So what if our opponent now takes the bishop and says, you know what? Now you're going to have to move the queen again, and you don't really have anything, because wherever you go, queen e7, for example, I'll just develop bishop d2, maybe long castle, and I can play a normal game. No, we are going to take the right to castle away from our opponent by playing bishop before check. There's no way to block with the pawn, so white will have to block it with the bishop. Unless he wants to move the king, but then we've achieved what we wanted. And with the queen still on the board and the two rooks coming on the open files, this king is not going to last that long. So here, after bishop blocks you, we're going to win the pawn in f4. This pawn is now going to fall apart, and the rooks are coming, and so we're completely winning this endgame. So let's move on. So let's look at this recap now. Okay, d5 and d4. Okay, take this pawn. We're looking at the variation with the pawn pushing. Okay, bishop c5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, knight e7. Okay, what if white does this move, which is one of the most popular and one of the most reasonable? c3 says, you know what, I'll give you that extra pawn, but at least I get on with development, and I'm doing okay. It's actually a nice game. Okay, we preserve the pawn advantage, and after knight to c3, we play a5. The idea is simple. You gotta be able. You see, when the knight goes to a4, attacks this bishop, then you see if the knight goes to a4 now, the bishop can't move anywhere. You will have to go to b6, but then the knight takes it, and then this king can castle. One of the strengths of this bishop in c5, besides it being extremely well placed, is that it stops our opponent from castling. So a5 allows us to find a shelter in the square h7, a7. So whatever white does, we can go back. So let's look at this move. Knight to d4 now, putting pressure on the pinned piece. Okay, castle. And after knight takes and pawn takes, bishop to a4. This structure, how do we deal with this? This is actually just fine for black. So there was nothing else to do, by the way. Bishop e3 is not possible. And the queen couldn't have gone to d2 to allow bishop e3 and maybe castle, because the knight would have gone to d4. So that's why our opponent's best move was knight to d4 and all this plan of smashing the pawn side, the pawn structure, but we're okay because now we're going to play the thematic move f6. So remember this move in this position. e6 is not possible because he will take it. Let's look at this move. Well, taking is completely crazy, right? With just so much winning after rook takes back. So let's look at this move, queen to h5. How do we deal with this? Okay, take the pawn. And after bishop to d2, you might ask, why not take back? Well, because we're looking at the variation where our opponent does castle and will place the rook on an open file as soon as you take in f4 and tries some attack like that. I've seen it before. However, you play rook to f5. That was the idea. Rook to f5 comes with an attack on the queen. Queen to h4. These are all best moves played by white in a faulty variation. Queen d6. Developing, and now finally castle. So this is the only time you will see our opponent being able to castle. But the most important thing to understand is that this came at a cost. Now you take the pawn in f4, you're just winning in material. Rook d to e1, best moves. Okay, bishop to d7 develop, bishop to c2, placing the bishop in absolutely fantastic square. How could we even allow this? This is a skewer. If we move the rook, the queen will infiltrate, but we don't care because knight g6 comes with an attack on the queen, and then the queen moves, rook to f6. Everything is holding together. Best move now to complete this line. You're winning, so there's absolutely no weaknesses. Queen to e2, rook a to f8. We're gonna drop the line here. We have tried also to look at the ideas of what happens when our opponent gives up a little bit more material just for the purpose of being able to castle, but even then it doesn't work. Oh, and one last mention before we change topic completely is in the variation with d4 you take, when white takes you straight away with the queen, knight f6, double attack on this pawn. Queen can't take the pawn because of the knight. e5, saving the pawn and attacking the knight. Knight to e4. Knight to c3, double attack on that knight and on the pawn. Okay, bishop to c5. And now it's not possible for the queen to win the pawn. This pawn is not free because bishop f2 check. Only move is king to e2. Although, I mean, yes, you can say king to d1. But then king to d1, you can play knight c3 check. And the knight is gone. It's not defending the queen, so you can win a queen for free. King to d2 is not possible. King to e2. But then, again, it also knight c3 comes with a check and you win the queen. So that move loses the game completely. So in this position, after bishop to c5, attacking the queen, queen to d3. Okay, now knight to f2 attacks the queen and the rook. But what else? I mean, if the queen had gone to d1, same thing. Queen to d2, you will be taking it. Queen to a4, maybe with check, you can attack the queen again with the bishop. And knight f2 is unstoppable. So after queen d3, knight f2, queen takes in d5. The best move here, obviously, we can't take the queen because knight takes back comes with an attack on c7. The best move is knight to d7, defending the bishop. And this rook is still trapped, so we don't have to worry. Knight to h3, okay, knight takes the rook. And after knight to g5, trying to find counterplay like this, castle. That's it, nothing to worry. Queen to e4, trying to find an attack on h7. Okay, bishop f2 check, king moves, and now knight to f6 will do the job. The pawn can't take because the rook will pin the queen. The knight is defending this pawn. The queen will have to move again, but you also have bishop g4 coming. Let's just see one more line of something that can go wrong in this king's gambit with the early d4 move. After take, this is knight f6. Here we need to mention this move, pawn takes in d5. Now the thing is, we've already mentioned something similar in one of the previous videos. This is not good to leave the pawn in f4 alone because it's kind of a thorn in the back for the white player because he can't really develop this bishop and he can never really push. It doesn't make sense. And the way you take advantage of this is through development. So the best move here is not to take back, but rather to play knight to d7, the idea of playing bishop to c5. And nothing stops us from putting the bishop in c5 and stopping our opponent from castling. Let's make an example. Knight f3, develop. Okay, bishop c5. Queen to d3, moving away, castle. And now bishop e3 to counterattack this bishop and potentially try to castle later on. It's not possible because rook e8 simply wins on the spot. So you pin in the knight and the bishop, and there's two attackers, and that's gonna be it. So what about bishop to e2 actually? And the idea is to simply play knight to d4, obstructing the bishop, and then castle. Okay, rook e2 pins the bishop, and the idea of knight d4 now is just not possible because you will simply win this pawn. And as soon as our opponent castles, you will take this knight, and then you can win this bishop. Let's make an example. And here we're planning to play knight b4, and that's going to be it. Well, our opponent can't just develop. Let's make an example. If he castles, knight to b4. So now the queen will have to move. But nothing really works. Because you see, the queen moves away. Okay, take the knight. And when the queen takes back, you might say, okay, if we take the bishop, there's an attack on this knight. But in fact, the best move is knight to c2, attacking these two. There's absolutely no compensation. Okay, so in this position, we know that castle is not good because knight to b4 does the job. What if our opponent plays a3 to stop knight b4? Okay, well, knight 7 goes to f6. And how is the position evaluated? -5. How is this possible? If, there seems to be nothing. However, the development is so smooth. You see, now white castles, but now bishop to f5. And our opponent is forced to take. If the queen moves away, remember, you can take this knight. The knights are protecting each other. When the queen takes back, then you can win a bishop for free. The bishop is only defended by the knight. So it looks like, queen takes is forced. But now bishop takes this with check. It's a Zwischenzug, and we should be able to win a piece. So now let's make a few mentions about other ideas after d4. Instead of d4, we're looking at this. After d5, d4, we're looking at this enough. When our opponent takes in d5, then we know we have to take in f4. And now there's a few things we need to see. For example, the very early bishop b5 move. This is check. and there's double attack on c6. Okay, fine, we go to c6 anyway. And after take, we have an isolated pawn. However, after bishop to c4, black goes on with queen h4 check straight away. And now this is why that move didn't work, because when you have double attack on g3, meaning when you have a pawn attacking g3, you can play the queen move here. You don't have to worry. It's the best thing to do, because pawn moves here doesn't work, right? You can take it for free, and you're completely winning. Knight f3 counter-attacking the queen doesn't work. You push the pawn, and it's check. Yes, you lose the queen, but you win this rook, and you make another queen, so you're winning. So in this position, after king to f1, bishop to d6, developing, knight f3 attacking the queen, queen to h6. We've seen something similar. See, you will remember the patterns as they happen. This is the best place to put the queen. Go and watch all the other videos about how to beat the King's Gambit to have things more and more clear. d4. Okay, knight e7. So it's too late for white to play a normal game because he can't castle anymore. Now you'll see. Knight to c3, castle. And that's it. There's nowhere to put this bishop that makes sense. Let's look at this move. Knight to e4. The idea of taking the bishop pair from us. Bishop to c7. Save it. Okay, king to f2. Allowing the development of the rook. This is not good enough because knight to d7 and now rook to f1. Seems like our opponent will be able to castle and maybe play a normal game. However, knight to b6 comes with an attack on the bishop, so it claims a reply. Bishop to b3, a5. This also wants a reply because a4 traps the bishop. a4. Okay, bishop to f5. This also demands a reply. These are all forced moves. Bishop attacking the knight. Queen to e2, developing. How is it that we're completely winning? How is it? It's difficult to understand because you will think this is a completely normal game. But what you need to understand is how badly the white pieces are placed. Rook a to e8. Preparing to pin on this extremely powerful file. King to g1. The king is castle. And now the knight goes here to d5 and there's double attack on this knight. And that's it. If the knight goes to d2 and protects that knight, knight to e3. What a tragedy. Attacking this rook, attacking this, putting pressure on the pawn in g2, putting pressure on the pawn in c2, and allowing double attack on this knight. The best move by white now would be knight to f2. But now the best is knight takes pawn in g2. And, you know, it's already impossible to come back. King can't take, so there's an attack on the queen. Knight to g4, for example. Okay, well, the queen moving to f3, for instance. Just play knight to h4, comes with another attack on the queen. The queen will have to move, but wherever she moves, it can't go anywhere here. All these squares are attacked by black pieces. Wherever she moves, you got queen g6 and then queen g2 mate. So that's not going to be possible. So here in this position, after knight g2, what if our opponent just plays knight to g4 and counterattacks our queen? Okay, take the queen, knight takes queen, check, take back. But the king can't take the knight because it's protected. Knight to f3. Okay, the knight simply returns to e3. And that's it. There's nothing here. Bishop takes. Okay, take back with the pawn. And yes, we have a bad pawn structure, but we're winning in material and we're winning this game. Here's another mention. Instead of the move bishop b5, here at this point, after the pawn takes in d5 and we take in f4, instead of bishop b5, which is not good enough because it gives us that strong attack, what if knight to c3 now? Again, we have attack on the square g3. This is a popular move, yet completely wrong, because queen h4 check. And now two things we need to see. Let's say, for instance, okay, let's go with this one straight away. g3, you take. Again, as mentioned, knight to f3 doesn't work because g2 check wins the rook and makes another queen. What if the pawn takes back? The best thing to do is not to take this rook, but rather to check, because we're going for a stronger attack. King moves to the only available square, and now check. Knight blocks, and now check. King moves over there to e1, and now this is mate. So once again, in this position where we take the pawn in g3, what if white gives us a check first? Queen e2 check. Okay, block with the bishop. And now, if they take our pawn in g3, now the best move is to take this rook, because you don't have the winning attack. You just don't have anything in particular. The best thing to do is to win the rook. So what if our opponent now plays king to d1? Removing the king from the dangerous the discover check idea. Okay, bishop to g4 attacks the queen, so skewers. Pins the queen to the king. So knight f3 is forced. Queen to h5, double attack on that knight. Bishop to g2 defends it, and now we take this pawn. Strangely enough, rook takes back, and now the best move is to win the exchange. Queen takes the rook, and after it gets taken back, we take the opponent queen. King takes, and now a6 is the best move to stop knight b5 threat of going to c7. That would have been a strong move, and we're completely winning. Here there's nothing. d6 is an interesting idea, but you just take it with the bishop, you develop, and if the bishop takes in b7, you play rook a7. There's nothing for white. Without the exchange, we're winning the endgame. If white plays d3, for instance, instead of d6, normal development, again, look, we're winning. We up the exchange. There's nothing here. Bishop to e3, maybe continuing development. Knight g to f6, rook to f1. White is fully developed, that's true, but now we castle and we're up a pawn and the exchange. So this will be enough to secure a win. So let's make one more recap so we can look at another line from the knight c3 example. So take, knight c3. Okay, when they allow us this attack on g3, go for it. Check. And now if king to e2, this is one of the thematic moves, but it doesn't work in this case because bishop g4 check, knight f3 is forced, bishop to d6. Developing. Queen e1 is one of the main moves. The idea is to swap, and then it's gonna be a pretty equal game. Queen to h6, don't do the swap. And now two ideas before we close. One of them is king to f2, removing the pin, and now this knight is free to move. Knight to e7, and after bishop to b5 check, the best move is knight to d7. If our opponent attacks the bishop, what to do now? Okay, take, it doesn't matter. And after the pawn takes back, long castle. And why is it that the position is evaluated minus 350 here? It looks like everything's completely normal. The thing is that this king is not going to last long. And yes, our opponent has the bishop pair, but even after white plays the top engine move, which is d4, it's still a tragic position because knight to f5 comes now, and we're exploiting the weakness on the square e3 and g3. We also have this strong check with the queen, and we have the infiltration of the rooks on an open file, and our opponent can't even develop correctly. Trading this bishop, doesn't make sense absolutely on any level because you can just take back and then the rook is coming to an open file and doubling up already. There are no moves. A move like knight to e4, for example, attacking this bishop. But still, the problem is that the pawn in f4 can never be taken. That is the main flaw of the King's Gambit. This allows you to take a free pawn in d4. There's absolutely nothing there. So in this position earlier we are going through king e2. Bishop g4 check, knight f3 is forced unless our opponent wants to give us the queen. Bishop d6, queen e1, queen h6. And earlier we went through the idea of playing king f2, maybe develop the bishop, castle manually, but it doesn't work. We have too much more development. What about knight e4, attacking this bishop? Okay, knight to e7, ignore it, because we want to go on with development. Knight takes bishop, take back with the queen, puts pressure on this pawn, but that's not the point. After pawn attacks the knight, remember, you want to do this. And now king takes is too dangerous and too stupid. So after pawn takes, castle. And now no matter what our opponent does, we're going to take this pawn. Let's make an example. If white plays c3 or c4, it doesn't matter. Let's say if he plays c4, you just take this pawn. Because the idea is rook e8 and you win the opponent queen. So if our opponent plays, I don't know, c3, just as an example, knight takes d5. Okay, and after king moves away, knight to c6, and now d4. Looks like our opponent might try counterplay, considering that he has the bishop pair at least. But no, because rook f to 8 comes with an attack on the queen will have to move. And now the knight in c goes to e7, bishop develops, knight e3, too strong to be real, rook to g1, placing the rook in a good place. However, queen back to h6, infiltrating on this file, and there's so many things that could happen, but none of them saves the white player. Besides, I've been doing my best for you to know all the patterns and how to exploit all of the possible positions. So we're gonna drop this line here,